What is up, guys? Randomonium here. This is your Fantasy LCS Week 6 analysis and prediction video. In this video, I'm going to break down all of the matchups for NA and EU LCS for Week 6. And obviously, I will be discussing the results from previous weeks, and I'll also be discussing the results from Rift Rivals. So if you haven't watched any of those matches and you don't want the results spoiled, this is your spoiler warning. And I definitely want to talk a little bit about Rift Rivals because that just finished, and I actually really enjoyed it. I was kind of, a little bit hesitant at first because I was just like, well, what's the point? But it was really fun. It was really fun watching the NA and the EU teams play, and I thought the EU was going to crush NA. Like that's what I felt like going into it. I was like, wow, I don't know if we're going to be able to stack up against the EU teams because the EU teams look very strong. But yeah, there was a lot of surprises. NA came out on top, and I know that there's a lot of trash talking going on with NA greater than EU or other, crap like that. And I'm an NA fan. I live in the United States, so obviously I'm an NA fan, but I'm also an EU fan, right? As long as EU is not playing NA, I am rooting for EU in every single match because I think that, as a whole, the West, I want to see esports succeed in the West, like it has in the East already. I feel like, we're just not at the same level as a lot of the Eastern teams, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that esports is not very popular, and it's not really, looked upon the same way as it is in Eastern countries. So anything that, furthers that agenda and makes esports more popular in the West, I'm all for it. So I root for both NA and EU teams. So rather than focusing on talking trash or focusing on the negative, I think it's better that we focus on the positive, right? What really came out of Rift Rivals, in my opinion, is that NA got a little bit of confidence back after having a really disappointing Worlds performance last season and also having a very disappointing MSI performance. Now they've got a little bit more confidence that they can build on going into Worlds, because I think that NA teams really struggle a lot of times with their confidence when they get into international competitions, and they kind of just choke because the pressure gets to them because NA has never really performed that well, and they don't have that confidence on the international stage. And then for EU, I think that this was actually really good for EU because it makes them realize that, okay, maybe we aren't as hot as we thought we were. Maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and innovate. And that's actually going to really help them, I think, going into Worlds, is that they're going to continue to improve. They're going to continue to say, well, damn, if NA can beat us, then the Korean teams can definitely beat us. So I think that this is going to motivate the EU teams to play that much harder going into Worlds. So I think that this is good for both NA and EU, and I think that overall Rift Rivals was a blast to watch, and I think it's going to be a positive for both regions. So additionally, I also just came up with a new subclass video, Artillery Mages. So if you guys are interested in having those type of beginner guides, definitely check those out and give them thumbs up. I'm going to try and knock out more of those subclass videos because I know that a lot of people are they like them a lot. So I'll definitely try and knock those out more often. If you guys want me to review your replays just for fun, I do have a Guess Your ELO series. You can send your replays to my email address, randomoniumreplays@gmail.com, and I'll make fun of you and I'll try and help you out as much as I can. It's kind of more of a lighthearted commentary that I want to do on top of all the more serious intellectual stuff that I do. And then finally, there's a massive patch coming out for 6.14 that I'm not sure if everybody's aware of. So if you would like me to do a breakdown on those patch notes, just let me know. Just leave a comment. I'm not going to do it unless people want me to do it. But it is something that I find a lot of fun to do sometimes, is to do a patch notes video. So let me know in the comments below if you're interested in that. But without further ado, let's get into the Week 6 analysis. So we're going to run through all the weeks, and we're just going to look at the trends for the different teams. So we can see TSM, Week 1, didn't do too well. Week 2, they definitely improved, even though they had the same rating. They went 1-1 in both of those weeks. Week 3, they went 2-0, and they were A tier, S tier. Week 4, they went 2-0, and they were A tier, S tier. And then Week 5, they went 1-1, and they were just kind of all over the board. So we can see that when TSM goes 2-0, they're usually A tier, S tier, and when they go 1-1, a complete, cluster on who's going to score well. So just keep that in mind when you have those TSM players. For Cloud9 didn't look that great into Rift Rivals, unfortunately. They did have their success in week 5 against TSM. They ended up beating TSM on week 5, but then they didn't perform very well into Rift Rivals. So I'm not really sure if just Cloud9 didn't care as much about Rift Rivals and they were just focusing on, getting back and winning in week 6, or if they're actually going into a slump. But we can see that Jensen's actually been the one who's been performing the best out of the entire team. If Cloud9 has a good 2-0 week like they had in week 2, then you can see that they can do very well. But for the most part, it really is Jensen who's the most consistent player on that team, and I would continue to avoid their top laners because we're not really sure whether Impact or Ray is going to play in top lane. Phoenix 1 looked amazing in Rift Rivals. It looked like a completely new team. They started off with a really, really rocky start in this split. You can see how poorly they performed, especially in week 2. But I think Mike Young has definitely reinvigorated this team, and having X Special and support has really reinvigorated this team and gives a lot more experience and shot calling to the team. Mike Young is definitely the most consistent player on their team right now. But if they do well, if they can get like a solid 2-0 victory, then they could be S tier. But you can see like in week 5, they had 2-1 finishes, and they only were able to pull out B tier. So they really need to get those 2-0 wins if they're going to be pushing up into the A tier and the S tier. FlyQuest is another team that kind of had a rough start, but their week 5 was pretty good. So you can see that, when they go 1-1, they're able to kind of pull it out. Like High really has been the most consistent player, and actually Balls has actually been performing a little bit better than most people. But week 5, he had a really bad week 5. So yeah, that's really kind of, FlyQuest is just kind of hit or miss right now. It's kind of unclear whether their week 5 performance is going to continue or whether it was just 1 week. So I'm a little bit hesitant still to play FlyQuest players. CLG has been looking like one of the best teams in NA. They had a great week 5. Darshan has been playing amazing. Stixay looks like he's coming online. But yeah, you can see yet again, Darshan, Stixay. Darshan was S tier in week 2. He was S tier in week 1. So yeah, if you got Darshan, you're definitely doing very well. And I definitely think that Stixay has been putting up a lot of really good fantasy points lately as well. Dignitas looks like they've freaking fallen off a cliff. They started off incredibly strong. I think they were like 5-1 to start off the season through the first 3 weeks. And then you can see in week 4 they went 0-2, and then week 5 they went 0-2. So I'm kind of jumping ship on Dignitas. I honestly think that there's something going on behind the scenes with Dignitas. There's some type of drama going on within the team that they're not making very clear right now, because that's the only explanation I have for this team pretty much falling off a cliff like they have. So I think there's something going on. Whether, I don't know if it's coaching or players or management, but there's something going on internal to the team that's causing them to have bad performances. So I definitely would be wary of playing Dignitas players right now. Immortals has also been, I guess inconsistent is probably the best word. They've looked like the best team in the league at times, and then at other times they haven't looked like, they've looked like a middle of the pack kind of team. So you can see like they've been playing phenomenal, and then week 5 they went up against a brick wall in TSM, and actually Phoenix won and actually had a pretty poor performance. I still think that they are one of the best teams in NA. I just think that they just had a really bad week. So yeah, I definitely would still say that playing Immortal players is probably worthwhile. But as far as like who you should play on that team, they're pretty consistent. Like you can see that there's nobody who's really sticking out on the Immortals team from week to week. They're all around the same tier every single week. Echo Fox is another team that has not been performing probably as well as they want to. The only person who really has been putting up consistent fantasy points is Froggen. But yeah, so I would probably, the only person I would play on Echo Fox right now would be Froggen. Team Liquid, another team that's really been struggling. You can see that they've been near the bottom most weeks. I would not be playing anybody on Team Liquid. And then Envy has shown some promise. I think they're like 5-5 right now, but they really haven't been able to put together like a super strong week. You can see this was their best week. I think week 2, they went 2-0 and they were B tier. That was the best that they did. So, I mean, you can play Envy players, but I would only play them if you just had a really bad draft and you're just kind of looking for a Hail Mary. Over on the EU side, G2 started off, pretty bad. They had the 3 subs in week 1, and then they haven't been very consistent, and then they kind of came alive in week 5. So they were pretty much, top tier week 5 because they only had 1 match against Monkeys, and they performed really well. And G2 did not look that great at Rift Rivals, so while they're a good team, they're not the same powerhouse that we saw in the previous split. Unicorns of Love has been putting up pretty damn good fantasy points in most of their weeks. They have had a few slip-ups. We can see like week 3 they were only around B tier when they lost to Splice. And then when they beat G2 they were kind of actually really low, C tier, D tier. But for the most part they're pretty solid when it comes to fantasy points. So I think that you're pretty safe to start just about anybody on the UOL roster. Fnatic is another team that's looked absolutely phenomenal. I actually think that Fnatic is the best team in EU right now. And you can see that, week in, week out, they've been pretty damn consistent. The only week that they did poorly was week 2 against G2 again. So this is a kind of a reoccurring theme that people who play G2 do not perform, don't get as many fantasy points as when they play against other teams. But yeah, you can see that pretty much any other week Fnatic has been doing pretty phenomenal as far as their points are concerned. Misfits is one of those middle-of-the-pack teams where if they get a favorable matchup, they will rack up a ton of fantasy points. But if they get a bad matchup, like in the case with H2K, they do rather poorly. So I would just be very hesitant to play Misfits players depending on what their week is. If they have a good week, they're a solid pick. But if they have a week that's kind of much higher risk, like if they're playing one of the top teams, I'd be hesitant because they're definitely a middle-of-the-pack team. They're not a top-tier team right now. H2K, Odo Omne, and Yankos have been looking the best on that team so far. And they've been kind of, they can put up a lot of fantasy points if they have a good week. Yeah, you can see this week, Odo, week 4, Odo had a pretty bad week. But for the most part, he's been pretty damn consistent. Like week 5, he was the number 1 top laner. So for the most part, I think Odo and Yankos are probably your safest picks on H2K. But the rest of the team is not, putting up bad fantasy points. Like Shay has been putting up some of the highest fantasy points out of any support in the league. Splice is kind of like Misfits where they really are hit or miss. But if they have a good week, they will be S tier. They put up a lot of fantasy points when they have a good week, but when they have a bad week, they put up like no fantasy points. They're either S tier or they're D tier, as you can see from their week in and week out. Vitality is another team that kind of has struggled a lot. You can see here, like earlier on, they were kind of D tier consistently, and then we had this little spike where Cabo Shard actually was really good. And week 5 they actually were S tier because they were able to 2-0 Rockcat. I would not say that that's going to happen again. I think that not that I don't think they got lucky. They definitely just completely stomped Rockcat, but they're not going to have those kind of favorable weeks most weeks. Rockcat has been kind of hit or miss. Like I actually picked them to beat Vitality, and I was completely wrong. The reason why I picked them is because they went 1-2 against Splice. They were actually able to beat Fnatic. They took a game off of Misfits. Like all these things, like they took a game off of G2, even though G2 had 3 subs down. But they have been taking games off of these middle-of-the-pack teams, so it made sense to think that they were probably better than Vitality. But Vitality definitely had their number in week 5, so I definitely would be more hesitant to pick up those Rockcat players. And then Monkeys and Ninjas in Pajamas at the bottom. They have actually been putting up higher fantasy points than they probably should based on their records. But that said, they're still, for the most part, C tier or D tier. So I would be hesitant to play them unless you just have a really bad team. If that's the case, then maybe you can get away with playing them, if they have a favorable matchup in a particular week. So that's pretty much the breakdown for NA and EU. Let's look at week 6. So, week 6. First up, I got CLG. CLG has got my highest risk, lowest reward. They're playing FlyQuest and Dignitas, and I put them highest risk, lowest reward, or highest reward, lowest risk. Words are hard. Because FlyQuest has been very hit or miss, and then Dignitas has kind of fallen off a cliff. So I think this could be a very good week for CLG, and I expect them to be around S tier. I've also got TSM up near the top. They've got a little bit of a harder week. They're going against Phoenix 1. I do think that they can beat Phoenix 1, even though Phoenix 1 has been playing a lot better. And then they've got Team Liquid, which should be a pretty easy matchup for them. And, TSM obviously looked phenomenal in Rift Rivals. So I do think that they will get a 2-0 this week, and that will allow them to get S tier. Fnatic has a really favorable week. They're going up against Vitality. Even though Vitality was able to do very well against Roccat, I think Fnatic is going to absolutely destroy them, and I think that Fnatic is going to be near the top of the charts as far as fantasy points are concerned. Immortals is another team that has a pretty good week. They've got Echo Fox and they've got Cloud9. And actually, I'm giving Immortals a slight edge over Cloud9 just because they've had a week to prepare. Like, Cloud9 has been kind of focused on Rift Rivals, and they didn't do very well at Rift Rivals, so there may be, confidence issues coming out of Rift Rivals. And I do think that Immortals will be able to kind of, exploit that. I do think that Cloud9, they might be the better team. It's hard to say. I think they're probably the more consistent team. But I think that this is kind of like a perfect storm for Immortals to, quote-unquote, upset them. And then the other team that Immortals is playing this week is Echo Fox. I do think they'll be able to win that one. Then I've also got H2K up here. H2K is going up against Roccat. So I think that's going to be pretty damn good for them. And, yeah. And the same can go for Unicorns of Love. They're playing against Misfits, and I do think that even though Misfits is like a solid, like, middle of the pack team, I think that Unicorns of Love is gonna crush them, and they're gonna get a lot of fantasy points this week. Okay, on to the A tier. So my A tier teams, I've got Cloud9 and I've got Phoenix 1. So Cloud9 has got Envy and they've got Immortals. I think that they're going to do really well against Envy, which is where they're going to get most of their points. And then against Immortals, I think it's going to be close at the very least, which should give them decent fantasy points. If they can beat Immortals, then that could push them up into that S tier range. So I definitely think they're a pretty solid pick this week in the A tier. And then I've actually got Phoenix 1 in the A tier because even though they're going against TSM, their other opponent is Dignitas, and I feel like Dignitas has been playing pretty poorly. And Phoenix 1 has been, playing really good, really, really strong. I feel like they really have kind of found their stride, and they're looking like, a top 3 team again. So I do think that they're going to, lose to TSM, but I do think they can keep it close. And I do think that they'll be able to beat Dignitas, which will allow them to get decent fantasy points. So for B tier, I've got G2 and I've got Splice. And you can see that I've tried to put them as far apart as possible, where I tried to give G2 the most reward I could at the lowest risk, and I gave Splice the highest risk and the lowest reward. And that's because they're playing each other this week. So G2 is playing Splice, and that's their only game of the week. So the reason why they're so high risk is because G2 has not been looking like that powerhouse that they were during the spring split. I do think that Splice has the ability to upset G2, but it's super high risk. Both of these teams are super high risk, super high reward. Whoever wins this game is going to get a lot of fantasy points. Whoever loses is not going to get that many at all, especially Splice. Like, Splice is kind of all or nothing. You're either going to be S tier or you're going to be D tier with Splice. So just keep that in mind when you're picking your teams this week. For C tier, I've got Rockcat and I've got Envy. So Rockcat is going up against H2K and Mysterious Monkeys. I do think that, H2K is going to do very well against Rockcat, but I do think that Rockcat can beat Mysterious Monkeys, which is why I'm giving them that C tier. They're not going to, put up a ton of fantasy points, but they could put up, average fantasy points. And then Envy is going up against Cloud9 and Echo Fox, and I feel like Envy is doing better. I feel like they're getting some confidence. I don't think they're going to beat Cloud9, but they do have a good shot against Echo Fox, which is why I think they'll be more around middle of the pack type teams. And at the bottom, I've got Dignitas, FlyQuest, Echo Fox, Misfits, Vitality, Team Liquid, Monkeys, and Ninjas in Pajamas. And all of these teams have pretty difficult matchups this week. Dignitas has CLG and Phoenix 1. FlyQuest has got CLG and Team Liquid. So I do think they do have a slight advantage in that Team Liquid matchup. Echo Fox has got Immortals and Envy. Misfits has got Unicorns of Love that they're going against. Vitality has Ninjas in Pajamas and Fnatic. So I do think that they have an advantage against Ninjas in Pajamas, but I think Fnatic is just going to crush them, and it's going to be very hard for them to, they might get C tier, but I don't think they'll get any higher than C tier. Team Liquid has got FlyQuest and they've got TSM, which I think they're going to lose both of those matchups. Monkeys has got Rockcat, and Ninjas in Pajamas has Vitality. And I think that they will both lose those matchups as well. So that's the breakdown for the Week 6 matchups. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. I'll be happy to answer them. If you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, and you've made it this far in the video, please subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And I definitely try to be very responsive to any type of questions or comments or suggestions you guys have. And I'm always trying to put out high quality content. But I hope you all have a fantastic day. This is Randomonium signing off.